Order. Well, I did not make the comments.
Well, it's not about taking away rights. It is about giving opportunity.
Good, ladies and gentlemen, good evening and welcome to Citizen A, where we wrap the week's current affairs with the best political team on television. Warning, we're as fair and balanced as Fox News. Joining me tonight on my ever-revolving panel of bloggers and opinion shapers, she is the candidate for Central Auckland and Labour Party spokesperson on social development and children, MP and high-ranking Jedi Knight, Jacinda Ardern, and he is an author, a columnist and political commentator. Proof the revolution will be televised, blogger Chris Trotter. Welcome to you both. Coming up tonight, issue 1. The Prime Minister helps appoint his childhood schoolmate to be the director of New Zealand's top spy agency. What's wrong with this picture? Issue 2. What should be done with Tiwoi Point? Is more corporate welfare justifiable? And issue 3. Is allowing the Defence Force to arrest protesters a goose step too far? Plus, we'll end the show on a final word, but let's kick things off tonight with issue 1. Political appointments are part of the landscape of our country. Both parties have a long history of appointing friends and fellow ideologues onto boards and positions in New Zealand, but such appointments have to meet some bare threshold of meritocracy, which brings us to the extraordinary situation that now envelops the Prime Minister. John Key has appointed as the director of the GCSB an old school chum via an appointment process that borders on the farcical. Prime Minister's explanation that he didn't tell New Zealand that he phoned Ian Fletcher, told him to apply, and then only processed him for the job because he forgot, makes mockery of our collective intelligence. Jacinda, these two men wield enormous power, and John Key is our only democratic check and balance. How can we have faith in the proper use of that power when John Key has just appointed his mate?
Yeah, and I think you make a really good point that this isn't your usual appointment for a civil service job. This is a job where there isn't a lot of transparency, around the way that the GCSB operates. It does all of its work behind very closed and secret doors, and the only person who really acts as our check and balance on that is John Key himself, who is briefed frequently on the work of the GCSB. So to add that to the mix of then that appointment process being done in this manner, which really quite frankly reeks, I think leads to serious questions. Add also the context of the way that John Key generally has dealt with other serious situations, the cronyism in government, and I think New Zealanders have every right to be very, very concerned about this.
Do we need to have an inquiry?
Well, I think around the appointment process, absolutely. On the one hand, we've got the Prime Minister saying, look, none of the original candidates were suitable. I went out and tapped someone on the shoulder. Then an appropriate appointment process took place. We've then got reports of someone saying that they had their interview called off at the 11th hour. It's not adding up. John Key's memory on this has always been shonky. And when you add to that the thing that kicked all of this off is, what did John Key know about the Kim.com situation and when? And so when you link all of this in, I think Kiwis deserve to have an independent look at this process.
When those two men are sitting in a room deciding whose civil rights they're going to breach, right? Whose rights, whose liberties they're going to, for national security purposes, we're going to spy on this person, what have you. When they're doing that, how do I know as a taxpayer, as someone who is contributing to this apparatus, that use of power is actually fair and balanced? If they're friends.
Yeah, and it's a really important point, and that's why, you know, our reliance in the past has been on the fact that you've got the highest democratically elected office holder in the land privy to those conversations. Now, you would want to think at least that those two individuals at the table have the best interests of those groups that they're representing at heart in those conversations. Now, when you know that one of them happens to be a mate who was shoulder tapped for the job, who's probably trying to protect the other guy, you start getting a little bit iffy.
Chris, the voice of the establishment, Sir Bruce Ferguson, told Campbell Live last night that he was concerned over this appointment process. How significant is that?
Well, I was quite astounded at the candour of Sir Bruce Ferguson on Campbell Live yesterday evening. And I think the fact that someone like that has stepped forward to comment on this issue indicates not only that person's concerned, and let's not forget, this person was not taken on for another term at the head of the GCSB. Jerry Mataparai actually replaced him for reasons I was never quite sure about. Not that he was there very long, because he had bigger, brighter fish to fry down at Government House. But Bruce Ferguson is the sort of person that used to fill this role.
Right.
In other words, unimpeachable, almost grey, not really a household name, got the job done without any headlines.
Yep.
And that's the way security operations used to be run.
Yes.
He's clearly upset. The people he knows at the GCSB are clearly upset at what has happened over the past 12 to 18 months.
Is someone like him beyond reproach? I mean, if he is criticising and speaking out of class, is that a big deal? Oh,
when someone like that steps forward, I mean, this is a pillar of the establishment.
Yes, yeah.
And he's on Campbell Live. This isn't supposed to happen.
Right.
And the fact that it is happening suggests that Mr. Fletcher's appointment gave rise to all kinds of concerns among people who understood the situation, were involved in the situation. Sir Bruce last night talked about a collapse of morale within the GCSB, associated with its involvement in the whole .com raid, the eavesdropping on .com and his associates. I mean, this is serious stuff, and I don't know how much Ian Fletcher knew. Dr. Paul Buchanan, speaking on Radio New Zealand this morning, pointed out that this person would be in the process of being inducted into his new role at precisely the time the raid was being organised. He took up his position just 9 days after armed police raided .com's mansion in Coatesville. Now, he also took office as the GCSB's legal advisors and their senior personnel were seriously worried, I suspect, at the fact that they had engaged in illegal activity.
Jacinda, the Prime Minister originally told us that he hadn't spoken to Ian since school days, yet after it was revealed that he had phoned Ian, he told reporters he had Ian's number in his phone. How many old school friends who you haven't spoken to since school days do you have in your phone right now?
I couldn't give you a precise number, but I think anyone, when they hear that situation laid out for them, says that sounds very odd to me. Why else? Why else, when you're sitting down having a conversation with the head of state services, a brainstorm about who might be good for a job, would you suddenly think of the guy who's acting as a civil servant in Queensland, I believe, just off the top of your head when you haven't seen him in apparently decades? Why does that come to the fore of your mind? I think these are reasonable questions to ask. And because the Prime Minister has had these almost continuous brain fades around really critical issues that he's been questioned about significantly, it also gives rise to the question of, if we know that Fletcher was in a meeting in February where the legality of the raids was raised, do we truly believe that John Key didn't know till September? Do we really believe that?
Chris, how damaging is this for the average Kiwi in the street? Are they going to care about this?
Oh, I don't think it's quite reached that threshold. I mean, the danger for the government lies in the very, very serious discrepancy between the Prime Minister's and the State Services Commissioner's version of events and Sir Bruce Ferguson's. Because if you listen to the former, there were 4 names suggested, they were ruled out of contention, the whole thing was about to begin again. The Prime Minister thought Ian Fletcher might be interested in this and gave him a call. According to Sir Bruce, there were 4 names, one of whom, which he believed to be eminently qualified for the post, received a phone call.
Last minute?
At the last minute, the 11th hour, as he said, saying, no, there's no need to come to an interview because the appointment has been made. Now, that discrepancy really needs to be cleared up. But the other thing about Fletcher is this. His background, while not being in the military or in the intelligence community, is in the area of intellectual property. This, of course, was the whole area which gave rise to the .com raid, copyright infringement of people's intellectual property rights. He was involved with this as a civil servant in the United Kingdom. He was involved with the people who were involved with the sexed up dossier which got Britain into war in Iraq. Now, here is a man who has that kind of background, not only in the intellectual property area, but in the very murky, not to say dangerous area of justifying, quite extreme actions on the part of the state. So, perhaps we shouldn't be surprised that he wasn't unduly alarmed by what immediately struck him upon being inducted into the GCSE.
Final question to both of you on this. We're going to move on. Now we know the relationship. Can we ask the question, did Ian Fletcher protect his childhood friend by not revealing that GCSB had illegally spied on Kim.com to the Prime Minister?
That gets to the nub of it. But I think you raise a really good point. Are New Zealanders really tracking this blow by blow? Well, I think the ultimate issue here is an issue of trust, is an issue of, are we being told the truth by the Prime Minister? And as the layers peel back, I think that's ultimately what this is about. Do we trust him?
Can we ask that question, did he protect Key?
Well, you can go two ways in a situation similar to the one which confronted Ian Fletcher. You can make sure that your friend is briefed, so he knows what may be coming further down the track, or you choose to give him plausible deniability so he knows nothing. Like
is that a professional responsibility?
In the world of
spooks,
providing plausible deniability to the leader of your country is pretty much out of the playbook.
Yeah. Okay, thank you, panel. Moving on with issue 2. Rio Tinto has cleverly manipulated the government's headlong rush to sell energy-generating assets by threatening to close the smelter at Tiwai Point at a cost of 10% of Southland's economy and 3,700 jobs. Chris, John Key has a woeful history of handing out corporate welfare. If the smelter closes, it will flood the market with cheap electricity, derailing the value of the asset sales. What does he do?
Well, he negotiates, and what we're seeing from the Prime Minister and the Minister of State-Owned Enterprises is bluff, counter-bluff. The negotiations that go on when you're dealing with a multinational red and tooth and claw like Rio Tinto.
There's a lot riding on this, isn't there?
Yes, there is, although I think the great boon to the consumer, which people are assuming will result if the Tiwai Point smelter closes and all of that electricity floods the market, as it were. I think those expectations are probably a little fanciful.
But they're fair, are they not? They're fair expectations.
Well, possibly, but the point is it's energy generating capacity that will be freed up, not electricity. As Brian Fellows said in this morning's Business Herald, we're not talking about a sudden glut of apricots, which will bring the price plummeting down to something we can all enjoy. That's not how it works.
Jacinda, the EPMU is demanding that their members' jobs don't get sacrificed. The reality is China's ability to mass produce aluminium makes the viability of the smelter economically unsustainable. What's Labor's position?
Yeah. And I think there's some layers that are making this a much more difficult situation to manage when we have asset sales hanging over our head, which puts the government over a barrel really in these negotiations. So first thing to do is remove that complexity from the situation, and the government of course is mindful about what this is going to do for share prices for Mighty River Power. Of course they are. And at this rate, this is going to have to be factored in for the float. So remove that complexity. Then what we need is some transparency from the government. You don't want a situation where either Labor or National is going to Rio Tinto with an open checkbook, and we literally know nothing about what would be required to bridge the gap.
Have you not been briefed? Surely
this is not something that we're getting information on. But the question for us would be simple. We need to look at the economic impact this would have on Southland. Equally, we need to look at the wider flow-on effects for the rest of the economy for any subsidy, that the impact it would have. That's what our approach would be. At the moment, though, we've had one weekend of negotiations and it seems to be all over. I think this process has been badly managed by the government.
Chris, Rio Tinto pay 5 cents per kilowatt of power. We pay 20 cents. If they lose their ridiculous subsidy, we all gain far cheaper electricity. Where is the lose here?
Well, you've got to be careful. I mean, the cheapness of the electricity supplied to originally Comalco, now Pacific Aluminium, or Rio Tinto in reality. I mean, that was always part of the deal. That's why we built this extraordinary hydroelectric complex in Manapuri. It was always to supply electricity way below, the price that you and I pay. So the government, in a sense, has been opening its checkbook
for a long time.
For a very long time, 40 years.
Right.
So, why stop now?
Right.
Would be one question I'm sure all the employees at Tiwai Point would be asking, and Tim Shadbolt, the mayor of Invercargill, and the Bluff Harbour Master, and I mean, there's an awful lot of money that smelter generates. It generates huge income for the Port of Bluff. The Port of Bluff would be devastated by the loss of all the ships coming in and out.
How much pressure is Bill English under right now?
Oh,
From all of those stakeholders in those electorate?
Yeah, I mean, Rio Tinto has always had this capacity to apply pressure to the New Zealand government. Once you've built a vast hydroelectric scheme, you can't just let it sit there. I mean, you got to use it, and they know that. But equally, we know that the Tiwai Point smelter produces some of the purest aluminium on Earth. It's very efficient. It's got a very settled workforce. And it generates a lot of money, not only for the province of Southland, but it earns us a lot in terms of overseas funds. I mean, the money that New Zealand, on paper at least, makes from the export of aluminium ingots is not to be sneezed at.
And as Tim Shadbolt's pointed out, what they produce they consider to be a bit of a unique proposition within the market. They see it as being a particular part of a product. I think I've heard him talk about aircraft wings and parts of cell phones and so on. But I think what this does highlight is that there's Bill English will see, I think, if we see the smelter shut down, we'll then start heralding the benefits for consumers around regional power prices. That's where I think they'll try and swing it as a bit of a trade-off. But I think what this highlights generally, though, is the difference that we see in the price that's being paid by residential consumers for power in New Zealand, and the difference between those the two products on the market. We are paying an incredibly high price. New Zealand has a right to question that. This highlights that, but we have to be willing to recognise as well that at the present point of time, when our export dollar is doing what it's doing, when our employment market's doing what it's doing, we need to give due consideration as to what we should be doing around the employment question in Southland.
So
not
Labour
letting
will
ourselves
be renationalising the electricity generation sector and the national grid.
Chris, I think it's only fair that we as a country start putting pressure on government to start asking questions about what's going on in our electricity market, because it's certainly not serving consumers in the way that I think we should be willing to accept. And we lose our leverage to do that as soon as those asset sales continue to proceed.
Okay, what are we doing with the bloody dollar? It is just too high for us to be able to make any money out of it.
And Tim Shadbolt has raised that issue as well.
As far as the government's concerned, it's not an issue.
Whilst he was also talking about peddling off the smelter to his Chinese sister city.
Oh, bless him, bless him.
But and this is why David Parker's been really firm on us looking at our monetary policy. This is what the manufacturing inquiry within Parliament is all about. We can't sit back and just let the market determine that our manufacturing sector slowly dies.
Are we getting any answers on that front?
Well, we've already started constructing our policy around altering our monetary policy. Firm part of our economic development plan. Government, unfortunately, not willing to intervene.
I'm very, very interested to hear how the mouse who proposes to bell that particular cat is going to achieve.
Final question to both of you.
We could talk about prudential ratios, but it makes for dull television.
Final question to both of you. Will Key cut a deal? And if the smelter closes, how is it going to impact shares? Key going to cut a deal?
Oh, look, I think the government wins either way on this. They will be able to put in the prospectus for Mighty River Power a caution in relation to the smelter, so the investors will know ahead of time. And if it's all resolved happily, then the potential price rise in the shares will be received with, great gratitude by the shareholders.
Oh, look, if Solid Energy's anything to go by, this is going to go badly.
Thank you, panel. Moving on with issue 3. In a week of momentous decisions, Simon Bridges' announcement in the weekend on Q&A that the government would push to criminalise protests on the open water was audacious enough. But the amendment that it will be the military who can arrest protesters and that this amendment will not be discussed by the public or be vetted by the Attorney General for possible breaches to the Bill of Rights Act is surely a goose step too far. Jacinda, allowing the military to arrest citizens without the declaration of martial law is surely something that needs to be debated by the public and checked for its breaches of the Bill of Rights Act.
Absolutely, and I think what we would find if we were given that opportunity is that this is a complete overreaction. That this is a government who's being unwilling to answer the fair questions that are coming from the public around the safety of what's being proposed around deep sea oil drilling, and instead of responding to those legitimate concerns has just decided to try and shut down a legitimate process. So yeah, of course we want protesters to be safe, but is that what this is really about? And I think given it was raised by industry, I don't think that this is what it's about.
Chris, does this legislative response to the Elvis Teddy protest case suggest that National actually intend very much to keep deep sea drilling and mining in general alive as an economic possibility for them?
Well, I think they're aware that potential prospectors have looked at what happened to Petrobras, have taken note of the fact that the New Zealand courts didn't feel that they were able to impose any penalty because of his position vis-à-vis our territorial limits. And so they will be, one way or another, shoulder tapping seems to be in vogue, and saying, now listen, if you want us to come back into New Zealand waters, then you're going to have to give us some sort of guarantee that some fisherman isn't going to sail his boat backwards and forwards in front of our millions of dollars a day Orient Explorer vessel. And the government's going, yeah, sure, what do you need?
Right.
It's Warner's Mark II.
Yeah. Pretty much as quick as that.
I reckon. And, that's our Simon Bridges.
Yep.
Practical young chap.
Yes.
Oh, yeah, well, I'm sure we can do something about that.
Right.
Yeah, okay, what do you want?
Yeah. Whatever you like, just line up.
Just like that.
Question to both of you. Will Simon Bridges bow to pressure to allow the amendment surely to be heard by the public? It's a pretty steep thing to allow the military to be able to arrest your own citizens, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. But, as we've seen before, I mean, we saw the super city legislation get passed, big chunks of it through urgency, and that was wrong as well. So, it's one thing to say on principle it shouldn't, it's another whether or not they'll change the process.
It's a little on the nose, isn't it, allowing your military to arrest your own citizens?
Well, yes, for many years, the United States had what was called the Posse Comitatus Act, which actually prevented the federal government from using federal armed forces in a policing role. That changed after 9/11.
No, of course.
They can conduct a form of citizens arrest currently, can't they? I mean, it's not that there isn't some
the whole
ability.
Thing really can be blamed on Sir Geoffrey Palmer because he got rid of the Public Safety Conservation Act.
Right.
I was going to say which part of blame generally
which was New Zealand's emergency legislation, which said these people are doing something which is very, very annoying to the government, so we'll get the Governor-General to declare a state of emergency and we'll issue some emergency regulations which will allow us to do whatever the hell we please.
Yeah.
Well, that piece of legislation is gone, so now you actually need to do a whole lot of other things if you want to have the same ease of oppression that once was available to the New Zealand government.
Let's wrap the show with final word. Jacinda, your final word this week is?
Bomber, this week I want to focus on the fact that in the face of up to 170,000 New Zealanders seeking work, we have a government who instead is introducing punitive welfare reforms which label our most vulnerable as drug-taking criminals who don't look after their children. It's time the government focused at the issue at the hand, the fact that New Zealanders are desperately seeking work and can't find it, instead of labelling those job seekers in the way that they are. So that's my final word for this week.
Amen. Chris, your final word this week?
My final word is a great big brickbat to the New Zealand Centre for Public Law, which has organised a 4-part series entitled Debating the Constitution, except it's not going to be a debate because it's a lineup of the good and the great, Sir Geoffrey Palmer, Dame Claudia Ryan, all of these sort of folk, Moana Jackson, Dr. Maria Barge, that you would expect to be on a panel in favour of the constitutional review. There is, of course, a negative team waiting in the wings, headed by Muriel Newman, Elizabeth Rata, David Round,
Yep.
who really could have made a debate of it, but sadly they haven't been invited.
Oh.
I think if you're going to have a debate,
Sure.
have a bloody argument.
Absolutely, absolutely. Well said, well said. Thank you, Chris. Thank you, Jacinda. Ladies and gentlemen, to my final word. National are ramming a law through to allow the New Zealand military to arrest protesters, and this legislation won't be vetted for possible breaches of the Bill of Rights Act, and we, the public, won't be consulted on it. This government has given massive surveillance powers to the police. The PM appoints his childhood friend to the head of the spy agency, and now we won't be allowed to debate a law that has the military arresting citizens. History will judge Simon Bridges very harshly as the minister who criminalised protest for corporations, and forcing that law through, minus the usual democratic protocols, will only add to the infamy. If you like tonight's show, please join our Citizen A Facebook site and connect with other like-minded news citizens, and follow me on my Citizen Bomber Twitter and Facebook page. Thanks for watching, whānau. Good night, Aotearoa.
Supporting local content so you can see more of New Zealand on